Good evening, everybody. If you'd like to take your seats, we can get started. I think a few people are just refreshing their coffees at the back. So it's wonderful to see so many of you here this evening on what is Canada's Agriculture Day. And it's a fantastic opportunity for us to celebrate and recognize all that's good about agriculture, both locally, regionally, and nationally as well. So I was actually in Ottawa this morning, and I had the chance to stay in Ottawa and involve myself in the agriculture celebrations and Canada Ag Day celebrations in Ottawa. But I actually wanted to come back because I felt it was much more fitting for me and much more appropriate for me to be back here in the community, recognizing all that's good about agriculture here in Nova Scotia and Atlantic Canada. Because agriculture in Atlantic Canada is really strong, and it's something that we all should be very, very proud of. So it's great to be here, and I'm really looking forward to the panel discussion and the questions from the audience a little bit later on as well. So it's a really, really important time for agriculture. And some of you will have heard me say this before, but I'm going to say it again, and I'm going to keep saying it until people start to realize just how important it is. So the future of the planet depends on agriculture. It's as simple as that. Everyone has to eat, and so everyone in this room has eaten today, yes? Yes. So, and that is purely down to agriculture. People need to eat to survive, but it's going to be even more crucial as we move forward. We've all heard the statistics, but by 2050, there are going to be 9.8 billion people living on this planet. In fact, recent projections are suggesting it's going to be over 10 billion people. And so those people are going to need to be fed. So food security is a key challenge that we are facing globally. We're facing it locally as well, even here within Nova Scotia, but also across Canada, particularly in the north. But it's a truly global challenge, because if we're going to feed those people, we actually have to double the amount of food that is accessible to the population. Now, I'm not saying we have to double the food that's produced, because that's not actually true, because we also have a significant challenge when it comes to food waste. And we need to actually tackle that as well. But we need to double access to food if we're going to feed that population by 2050. And we've got 30 years to do it. Climate change is another key challenge that we're facing. And agriculture is going to play a key part in that as well. Agriculture is the largest user of land on the face of the planet, and agriculture is the custodians of that land. Environmentalists looking after the land, reducing soil erosion, and doing things and carrying out activities to reduce climate change and increase carbon sequestration. So that's the second one. And then the third one is access to fresh water. And again, agriculture is the largest user of fresh water on the planet. And it's absolutely fantastic to see the innovative practices and technology that agriculture is using to reduce that and make agriculture much more efficient, both in relation to the production of the food, but also in the reduction of the use of water. So it's an important time for agriculture, because if we're going to meet those challenges, we cannot do it without agriculture. And when I go into schools and colleges and I talk to people about what agriculture is, people don't understand. They don't understand what modern agriculture is. When you talk to them and you ask them to describe what agriculture is and what farming is today, they'll describe to you a picture from the 1960s. They really haven't got an understanding as to the level of knowledge, technology required to be successful in modern agriculture. And so we have a key responsibility to communicate and ensure that the general public know and understand the industry that we work in and that we're very, very proud of. So it's great to be here with our community and also to be partnering with Meet Your Farmer and with the Nova Scotia Federation of Agriculture to be here this evening. And this evening we're going to be sharing 3 examples from our faculty, our alumni, and our students as to how we are working together to solve the challenges facing our planet today. So I'm now going to introduce our MC this evening, Dr. Chris Cutler. Dr. Chris Cutler is our Associate Dean of Research here at the Faculty of Agriculture. He holds degrees from Memorial University, Simon Fraser University, and the University of Guelph, and conducted postdoctoral research at the University of British Columbia. He has been at the Dalhousie University Faculty of Agriculture since 2007, where he teaches and conducts research mainly in the areas of insect pest management and insect ecotoxicology. Dr. Cutler has received national awards for his research from the Entomological Society of Canada and the Agricultural Institute of Canada. He has published extensively on pesticide risks to pollinators and stimulatory effects of insecticides on insects, and has delivered many invited talks on these topics in Canada, the United States, Brazil, China, and Europe. How somebody who looks so young has done so much, I do not know. But it is my honor to introduce Dr. Chris Cutler.
Stephanie asked me for a bio last week, and I had no idea why, and now I know why. So that was just a generic bio. Thank you, David, for that introduction. You may have, before we get started, you may have seen questions being posted on the screens around multiple choice questions, so I got a couple questions for you. Who knows, as many of you know, I think all of you know, before we became the Faculty of Agriculture at Dalhousie, we were at the Nova Scotia Agricultural College. Who knows the birthday of the Nova Scotia Agricultural College?
1905?
Birthday.
February 14th.
February 14th, right? So it's just around the corner, and the date is 1905. So we're going to be 115 years old on Friday. Pretty cool. So I'm going to moderate this session. We're going to give some presentations, as Dr. Gray mentioned, and we're going to have some questions, hopefully, from the audience. Each presenter will give a brief presentation of about 10 minutes or so, and then we're going to open the floor. There are mics available in the room, so please think about questions and engage with the panel and ask questions. The event is also being live streamed as well, and people that are viewing that way can also engage in questions. And you can text your questions at 902-890-8608. Is that right? Okay. I'll present our first speaker for this evening, and that is Dr. Rebecca Meeker. Rebecca grew up in Kitchener, Ontario, and studied zoology at the University of Toronto, specializing in animal behavior. She completed her PhD in animal sciences at the University of Guelph, focusing on behavior and welfare of farmed mink. From there, she went and did a postdoctoral fellowship in animal welfare at the University of British Columbia. So kind of followed the same path I did from Guelph to UBC. And there she worked with dairy cattle. She moved to Dalhousie from a position as a lecturer at the University of Reading in England, and she is a member of the International Society of Applied Ethology, which is people who study animal behavior. Her research interests include welfare assessment methods, the effects of early environment, and understanding and managing different individual differences. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Rebecca Meeker.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here today and get to talk to you about farm animal welfare and why I think this is an important thing to be doing research on. Oop. Presentation is gone. Okay. So, go back to my dairy farm slide here. So, I think this is an important issue. It's something that's growing in the public consciousness. Most recently, Joaquin Phoenix decided to criticize dairy farming this week during his Oscars acceptance. So it's something that's getting a lot of attention that I think we need to address. But it's quite challenging to know how to resolve animal welfare problems because there are such different perspectives on it. So even among people who believe in animal agriculture, you'll get very different ideas about what animals actually need to have good welfare. So if you ask a lot of people what an ideal dairy farm looks like, they'll talk about cows being out on pasture, being able to perform natural behaviors. But then if you talk to some other people, particularly a lot of dairy farmers working in our current systems, they'll say, well, actually, it's better for the cows to be inside. They have shelter, they're protected, they have a better relationship with the farmer. And so there are all these questions about actually what's best for the animal. And as scientists, we want to know what is the evidence, what is actually going to help the animal be healthy, but also avoid negative emotional states and have more positive emotional states. And so we can answer those questions through science. So, as was mentioned in my introduction, I started off working with farmed mink. So I didn't come from a farm background myself. I got into this as a graduate student, and I had the opportunity to work with animals on fur farms. Since then, I've been doing a lot with dairy cattle, and currently now also involved in a dairy goat project through a PhD student in England. And so I started working on this partly just because I really like the animals. If you look at these guys, they're nice to be around, even the troublemakers that do things like stand in their feed bins. But also, it was a way of using my interest in animal behavior and in psychology to try and do something useful to make the systems better. So a lot of the work in animal welfare is focused on trying to understand the animal's behavioral needs and what they would prefer to have, and then also working on how to do that practically in ways that the farmers can manage, that it's still economically viable, they can make a living, but the animals can have what they need. And part of the reason that I have chosen to continue focusing on farm animals is just the importance of the industry. It's a central thing in Canadian society. Obviously, we all depend on it, and it's also a huge scale. So if you look at the recent statistics on how many of these animals there are in Canada, the last year reported they had close to 2 million dairy cattle in the country, if you count calves and heifers. We produced over 1.5 million mink pelts last year, so that's that many animals that were reared in the country. Goats there are fewer of, but still a significant number, so over 200,000. And those are the animals that I'm particularly working with, but if you go to beef cattle, there's even more of those, with 9.5 million in the country. 145 million chicken and hens, and that's not counting pigs, sheep. I won't even get into aquaculture, where we don't count them by individuals in our statistics. So there's a huge number of animals that are here, they're under our care, so we're responsible for doing what we can for them, and there's a huge number that can benefit from this kind of research. So a lot of what I do has been focused on trying to figure out what the ideal environment is for these animals, both the physical environment and their social environment. So I and a lot of people have worked on social housing for dairy calves, because currently on dairy farms it's quite common for calves to be housed by themselves for some period in their early life, but that's not obviously the natural system for them. They are social animals. So we're trying to understand actually how important it is, how much social contact they need, and when to develop normally. And then starting to look at the physical environment as well. So we talk in science about something called environmental enrichment, which means adding things to the environment to try to improve the animal's welfare or encourage natural behaviors, so making it more complex. So in the picture there, I've shown there's a brush at the back because we know cows want to groom themselves and they don't always have the opportunity in their current pens. There's hay nets and there's a blue rope, which might seem like it's not a very natural stimulus, but it's something they can manipulate. They can direct some of their behaviors to it and just learn about interacting with more complex stimuli. So I focus a lot on the early environment because we know that it's so important. We know certainly for humans that what happens to you early in life can matter for your welfare throughout your lifetime. We know that from some animals, but we don't know very much about livestock and what specifically they need when they're very young. So to give you an example of some of what we found. First of all, when we give these things to the calves, they do use them. So this is a calf playing with a spring that we had hanging at the back of its pen. They seem to like manipulating those. And that suggests to us, if they choose to interact with it, that maybe it's something they like to have. That could improve their welfare. But then we try to measure things like their emotional states. And so one of the things we worry about a lot with farm animals is the experience of fear. And we know that animals like cows tend to be a little bit fearful of novelty. So we do these standardized tests where we give them something new that they've never seen before. In this case, it's a white bucket. And we look at how willing they are to explore and to go and interact with that object. And if they're more fearful, they're likely to be very hesitant and take a long time to approach it. And what we've found through the series of experiments we've done is that both complex social environments and having physical items in the pen, exposure to different stimuli, so there's more variability in the environment, make them less fearful of these new things, which is probably going to be helpful to their welfare because they are frequently exposed to new environments and new social groups on the farm, so we want them to be able to adapt to that easily. And this is obviously a benefit to the animals, but there are also potential benefits to the farmers. So if we look at some of the things that might matter in practice, there are some problem behaviors that you see in calves, like they start sucking on things in the pen we don't want them to suck on, and sometimes other calves. Farmers get concerned about possible health implications of that. But if we give them these items that are more appropriate for them to use that way, they do less of the sucking on other animals. So it's reducing some behavior problems on the farm. And the social environment particularly is important for development of their feeding behavior. So when we compared calves that were by themselves in the first weeks of life to ones that had social contact from the time they were born, the ones that had social contact started eating solid feed sooner, and they kept eating more grain even after the individuals were put with other calves, which meant that they grew better. They were better able to deal with being weaned off milk, and probably this is going to be important long term because we know their early growth matters for how much milk they produce when they go into the milking herd. So there are actual benefits to the farmers economically as well as for the animals. We haven't done a whole lot of long-term work on the specific stimuli for the calves yet. But I know from my work with mink, for example, that when we gave them very, very simple things in the cage, like these toy balls and chains, if they had those when they were young, not only did it improve welfare, but they actually produced more kits when they were bred themselves. So again, it was a win-win situation that the farmers could give something very cheap, they could improve the animal's life, and they could actually improve their profits as well. So this type of thing shows us that this research can actually be really beneficial to everyone and make these industries more economically viable potentially, but also socially sustainable so we can all be more comfortable with the way we are caring for our animals. So I just want to thank you, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. It's fantastic. So just to clarify, we'll hear from all the speakers and then we'll do the questions afterwards. So our next speaker is Ashley McDonald. Ashley is originally from East Stewiacke, is a first-year PhD student working in our Department of Business and Social Sciences here at Dalhousie in the Faculty of Agriculture. Ashley has previously completed her degrees here, her Bachelor of Science in 2014 and her Master of Science in 2019, again, here at the AC. Ashley is going to be discussing with us her master's research, which was focused on food waste within the retail and consumer stages of the food supply chain. Join me in welcoming Ashley.
Hi, everyone. As Chris said, I'm going for the trifecta of the barley ring degrees. So they are stuck with me for the foreseeable future. And I'm sure they're happy with that. So I'm going to just chat with you a bit about some of the work that I was doing within food waste. I don't want to get too into the weeds because I will happily talk for 3 hours about this, and no one really wants that. So I'm just going to give you a bit of the, meat and potatoes of it and tell some of my favorite findings from my work. So with David's introduction, he briefly kind of gave a good segue into what food waste is and what it looks like for our global society. Approximately 30% of all food that is produced for human consumption is never actually eaten, which is a shocking amount, particularly when we start to think about how we're going to meet this growing population, how we're going to get food to the people who need it. And with so many facing food insecurity and malnutrition, the fact that we're so willingly throwing away all this food, it's quite a shocking statistic to see. And we can see the kind of cost to the global society as well on this graph here. That's a significant amount of money and resources that's all being wasted today in our agricultural production. Now, I also highlighted 2 of the United Sustainability Goals that are connected quite closely to my project here. And I'm sure I know I could make an argument for all 17 being connected to my work, but I focus mainly on these 2. So these are 3 photos that were sent to me by a gentleman who works at a municipal waste collection facility. This was from one day's pickup from 4 small grocery stores in the Annapolis Valley region. These are just 3 of 12 photos that he sent me. So Canada is actually exceeding the global average when it comes to food waste. Approximately 40% of food produced in Canada is never consumed. 47% of this is occurring at our homes by consumers, with the other 53% being divided out across the food supply chain. Actually, it's divided out quite evenly. Processing facilities are wasting about 20%, retail and farms are 10% respectively, and then the remaining is divided out between restaurants and other food distributors. So this is actually costing Canada $100 billion annually in indirect and direct costs. So it's a significant cost to our society, not only monetarily, but with the social and environmental costs as well. But that's all that I have for the doom and gloom, because there are some really interesting stories that kind of came through my work. So as we all know, sitting in Nova Scotia, we have had a provincial-wide waste ban in place for the last 21 years. And we were the first province to do so, and followed suit by Prince Edward Island. With Ontario and Quebec finally getting on board, and they're going to be initiating their organic waste bans in 2020. So what this organic waste ban means is you're not allowed to throw organic materials for landfill disposal. We're still not perfect at it. There's still a significant amount of organic waste reaching landfill disposal, but Nova Scotia is actually, through our waste sorted management system, reduced our per capita waste generation significantly. I don't have the specific numbers in front of me, but the average Canadian wastes around 750 kilograms per year, but in Nova Scotia we're wasting around 400. So our waste management system has been shown to be effective, and when I completed a consumer survey as part of my master's research, I kind of confirmed that. Unsurprisingly, 38% of respondents in Nova Scotia or Prince Edward Island said that they always source separate their food waste from its packaging. On the other side of that, the provinces that don't have an organic waste ban in place, only over 31% said that they never waste, with another 40% saying that they rarely source separate their waste. This means that all that organic material is headed for landfill disposal. And we know when it goes into the landfill, it is significantly impacting climate change. When food is decomposing in these landfills, it actually has 10 times the global warming potential than carbon through methane production. Now, I know I mentioned before that retailers are producing about 10% of the food waste in Canada, but even though they don't have the majority share of waste generation, they have a very significant role to play within our food supply chain. They are very well positioned within it, where they have influence over our producers and our food processors, as well as our consumers, because they're that last point of sale for the consumers as they're leaving the grocery store, but also they're the ones that dictate what products actually get into their store. So a few of the things that I saw when I was doing this work was retailers are starting to put in quality standards and management practices that are really reducing their food waste, because when they're wasting food, that's a cost to them. So it benefits their bottom line if they're able to reduce their food waste. A lot of studies have shown that consumers are much more willing to purchase a product if it's on a full shelf. No one wants that last loaf of bread on the shelf for some reason. It's perceived to be, if no one else wanted it, I don't want it either. So retailers are starting to shift their stocking practices to have smaller shelves so that they look fuller, and it means that it might require a bit more restocking on their part, but it helps to reduce their overall cost when it comes to food waste. Additionally, donation programs have become pretty standard practice across most of the retailers. Sobeys, for example, has a contract with Feed Nova Scotia where they will donate any of their unsaleable product that they can to Feed Nova Scotia. France has actually enacted a policy requiring all grocery stores to donate their food. They're not allowed to throw it out. They have to donate their food, and then it's the responsibility of the donation center to determine whether that can go to their constituents or not. There's some argument that this is just passing the buck with who's now responsible for disposing of the product, but everything has its downsides. Speaking of downsides, the discounted products, I know personally if I go to the superstore after 5 o'clock, all the bakery products are half off. This is a great initiative that stores are trying to reduce their personal food waste and passing on some savings to the consumer. I have a picture here of the Take Me, I'm Single bananas. This is another great example of some fun initiatives that retailers are able to influence their consumers at that last point of sale. Again, this is, are you encouraging over consumption by your consumers this way? But it is helping to reduce the store's food waste. But my favorite initiative that retailers have started to put in place comes from Kroger, followed by Sainsbury's. So Kroger is a grocery retailer in the United States, and what they started doing is closing their loop when it comes to their food system. So traditionally, from the distribution center, a truck full of groceries goes to the grocery store. It goes on the shelf, and then the truck goes back to the distribution center. But what Kroger did was, instead of that empty truck going back, they fill it with the food that wasn't able to be sold at the store. So you're not adding any food miles to those products because the truck had to go back anyway. And when the food gets back to the distribution center, they put it through a depackaging machine that removes all of the packaging, collects all the organic waste material, and then puts it into an anaerobic digester. The digester produces biogas, and Kroger has actually been able to reduce their natural gas consumption at their distribution centers by 90%. That's incredible. I think that's just so exciting. And it was so successful that they have one on the East Coast, and now they have one on the West Coast. And Sainsbury's in the UK has actually copied this model. And I'm hopeful that other large retailers will start to copy this model, because it's really, really efficient, and it just makes sense because they're keeping everything internal and reducing their overall food waste. My last point, so this is the food waste hierarchy, and we can see here, we start at the top with prevention. Obviously, that's the most efficient, and then we move down the line to landfill disposal. Through my work, I found that a lot of the times our initiatives, our focus, our research was getting clustered towards our recovery stages, because prevention is hard. Changing people's behavior is hard, and it takes a long, long time. And it's difficult to go through these steps, these higher level steps. So instead of focusing on waste reduction, we were trying to figure out how to manage our waste. And I thought instead of figuring out how to throw things out better, we should figure out how to stop the waste at the start. So I flipped the pyramid on its head, and instead I think that we should focus on building a foundation of prevention and then moving up as we need to. So rather than looking down the list and seeing what's easiest, what can we figure something out for now, we build upon the basis of prevention. How can you prevent at home? I always like to give a couple of tips and tricks. Make a grocery list, meal plan, stick to that plan, buy what you need and eat what you buy. And best before dates are suggestions. Expiration dates are about safety. Expiration dates are what you'll see on baby formula, meal supplements, and special dietary drinks and stuff. Best before dates are just suggestions by the retailer or the manufacturer, so bear that in mind. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashley. That was excellent. Yes, we're glad you're still with us. I was going to say something funny, but I'm not. Our next speaker, last but certainly not least, is Josh Oulton from Taproot Farms. Josh grew up in Windsor, Nova Scotia, working alongside his grandfather on his beef and layer farm. After attending NSAC, he began his career in agriculture. He worked in the dairy industry before transitioning to horticulture. He's currently farming with his partner, Patricia, and a 40-member farm team, with some of them making the annual trip from Jamaica each year. The farm, I believe right now, is 300 acres of vegetables, fruit, malting barley, and pasture livestock. For the last 4 years, they've been producing flax fiber, and this is the first year that the farm is going to be producing yarn, I believe. Interested in flax production from the seed to shirt, Josh has studied all aspects of growing high-quality flax fiber straw and processing of the flax into high-quality linens. The farm has a 300-member community share agriculture component and sells products to local farmer markets. Josh was president of the Horticulture Nova Scotia, of the Atlantic Canadian Organic Regional Network, ACORN, and is an active member of the organic farming community. Josh and Patricia were selected as outstanding young farmers in the Atlantic region. We are very pleased to have Josh with us tonight, so please join me in giving him a warm welcome.
Thank you. So the why did I do this? Why did I do this even though everyone told me not to do it? I have to work too hard. Why would you want to be a farmer? And it's a common question that I think about, and it really comes down to probably 6 people. My grandparents, like was mentioned, both sets of my grandparents were farmers. So they were I idolized them. And then when, as I got older, I had a dairy farmer, Bob Wilson, and his mother, Alice, who were farmers, obviously, dairy farmers. And they were just like my idol. And then, so I wanted to be like them. And then there was this one segment of Sesame Street that there was a young person who would crawl up into the feed bin and get a bucket of grain and go feed the animals. And I would just like, every time I saw that, it was like, that's what I want to do. I just wanted to do that so bad, but we didn't have a farm where my parents weren't farmers. Just skipped a generation, I guess. And I was just like, I'm going to make that happen for myself. It was a drive in me to be a farmer. So that is the why. And as we have as I've grown up and have become a farmer, and now it's about just growing things and seeing the completion of the crop. And also what has really given me a lot of passion these days is the people on the farm, like growing farmers, I guess, growing farmers, young farmers, old farmers, female farmers, black farmers, like just like having farmers on our property it brings me a lot of joy at this point of my life. So just figure out this thing. There we go. So our farm is located in Port Williams, Nova Scotia. And so what we are doing right now, what are we working on? We are working on growing food, and now we're working on growing clothes. So the food component is vegetable production under organic practices. We now have included, I had the privilege to go, part of my Nuffield, to go to Rome, to the FAO Committee of World Food Security, and it inspired me to also take on the practices of regenerative agriculture, which is now the big phrase of regenerative, but it has a lot of great practices, and we were doing some of those already through organic, but now we are trying to introduce more of those all the time. So, as was said in the bio, long-winded bio, that we have 40 people on the farm, and presently 15 of those are farmers from Jamaica, and then the rest of them come. We used to have a fair amount of Newfoundlanders, but now it's only 3 Newfies come now, and the rest of are local people. And we invite everybody and anybody to join the farm. We work with wolfers, the wolfing organization. If anybody calls us with social media now, you get calls from all over the place. I'm hoping to get people from Kenya and Germany this year to come on the farm, to be on the farm, because that's a real passion of ours. So again, going with the theme of growing things, this is my daughter Lily and Patrick. Patrick showed up on the farm as a young man from Jamaica who's trying to sort out his life, and he's been on the farm for 15 years, and Lily is 14. So they have formed this relationship, and they farm together now, and it's really quite something to see. A little bit more about the farm. I keep going to people. So we are farming in conjunction. So I came to NSAC. I'm not following a very good timeline here, but I came to NSAC in the late 90s. Well, early 90s, and I finished in the late 90s. And I met my wife here, which happens quite often. There seems to be a common theme at the agricultural college, probably most colleges, but this one seems to have a lot of that happening. And she had a farm in Greenwich, which we have gone back to, Noggins Corner Farm. And so through the structure and all the fun stuff of family business, we created another farm called Taproot, and that's where all the vegetables are grown. And presently we are growing about 150 acres of produce, and we have added animals to the mix because we feel we're trying to create a farm that is like a closed loop farm, so the pigs can be out on the pasture, the chickens can follow them. It's a work in progress. The price of those animals is difficult because they are less productive on the soil rather than inside a barn. So we're trying to play with that and what's the benefits of having animals, but for the soil and the cycling of the nutrients, it's very important. So we're just trying to learn how to market our animals as something different and better. And of course, as a farmer, you need to be everything sometimes. It seems like all the time. So to take us to the next thing that we're working on, so we're trying to create this over here, grow our vegetables and our animals, and create this system. But now we're trying to create these clothes on our farm. So we had this idea of like, we can have local food, why can't we have local clothes? And we had this plant on our farm that was stinging nettle. And we didn't know what to do with it. And we thought it was a gift, but we didn't know what kind of gift this is. We tried eating it. It's okay. But anyway, we found out it would be a good fiber. And so we created, we put together, we organized a symposium on fiber and dyes, natural dyes. And we have, through that process, we came across flax. And so now we're in year 6 of growing flax. I've just traveled the world. I went to 14 countries, learning everything I could. I could give and I have 20 or 30-minute talk on that topic, but I won't go there. But it was, I have learned a lot, I have grown a lot, and so hopefully soon, like soon, 10 years soon, we will have clothes like this flax shirt. It's a much larger undertaking than what we thought when we planted that first seed. And I'm not changing. A lot of these pictures are people because that's where I thought I would focus my talk, is that I'm trying to grow farmers. This is some of the farmers from Jamaica, and we're actually raising money for Farm Up Jamaica, and we're trying to, because they're trying to also, they have a situation in Jamaica where they're losing farmers, and so they're trying to get people to start farming again. That's just us wearing our shirts. Meet your farmer at the Open Farm Day. This is a picture where we're trying to engage through the SDGs of Zero Hunger, and this is a community garden that we have on our farm now, to hopefully to engage people to come to our farm and grow their own food and be involved in food production. This is obviously me and a bunch of the guys from Jamaica, and we're just, we actually started a little diaspora, African diaspora medicinal garden, and that's what we're working on right there. We like to get in the community and cook some great food, and that's, over. There, see that? Segue into that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Josh. That was wonderful. So at this time, I'll ask our 3 speakers to come up to the front and take a seat and answer questions that are no doubt going to be coming from the audience. So we have a mic at the front, and I have one here. So this is a Q&A session. You heard some great talks. If you've got questions for our speakers related to what they were talking about, by all means. Do you want to?
I don't really need a mic. I can speak loudly.
Well, I'm thinking about the online stream.
This is a question for Ashley. I'm interested in the percent of food waste that is plant product food waste versus animal product food waste. Do you have any estimate on that?
It's about 60% of the food waste. It's about 60% plant. It has a much higher percentage of waste. Typically, from what I was looking at within Nova Scotia, a lot of the meat products are able to be recovered either through rendering or through, like there's a couple of small grocery stores in the valley that send all their waste meat to the zoo. But most of it is plant material, and some of that is through kind of convenience products, where it's, maybe with ugly carrots, I use that as an example sometimes, ugly carrots being filed down into baby carrots, and some of that plant product being wasted afterwards. Or just people with the best of intentions trying to eat their broccoli and don't.
Segueing on that, with ugly food, how can we as just community members fight so stores keep selling or can sell ugly fruits and vegetables and other stuff like that versus tossing?
Yeah, there's starting to be a bit of a shift. Consumers are demanding for less food waste and more sustainable practices. So I used Superstore as an example before, but they have their Naturally Imperfect brand as their store brand, where they have kind of the less ideal bag of apples. There are a couple of food delivery services that specialize on ugly foods. There's one in the States called Imperfect Produce that focus on kind of capturing that food that has been deemed undesirable and instead giving that to people who say, I want it. And there are some forgotten food here in Nova Scotia. If there's a producer that says, okay, we're not going to actually harvest these, they can go in and they can collect it and then donate it. So there is a bit of that push there. And I think just continuing to support those products and those services that are trying to make that effort and establish that there is some sort of market demand is going to be the best thing. Consumers drive the market, and public will respond to that.
Can I speak to it as well? Of course. So on our farm, through our CSA boxes, we have for this year we have zero packaging. So we just put everything in a box, and it is the good carrots and the bad carrots. I mean, obviously we don't give rotten carrots, but any shape and size goes. So that's our way of helping with that food waste. And of course we have animals on the farm, and anything that is rotten, I don't know if that is considered, is it food waste if we feed rotten carrots to pigs?
No, without getting too much into it, because it's this whole weird thing of, what is waste? At what point is it waste? That was one of the questions that I got during my defense that I still harbor some resentment towards. But yeah, if it's getting captured at, in the hierarchy, we say prevention is ideal. After that is donating it for human consumption. And then after that is for animals and pests, because that is going to be a higher utility for that food product. So no, according to my definition of what waste is, it is not food waste.
Excellent.
Who's deeming the food in the grocery stores unsaleable? How do they know we wouldn't buy misshapen carrots?
Yeah, so loaded question a bit. When I was doing my research, I actually reached out to all of because, in Canada, we only really have 4 retail distributors. I reached out to them all, and they said, we do not want to participate in this work. So instead, I surveyed their employees. And the employees said that they have company mandates that say if it is, so some stores have it, if it's three days before the sell-by date, they have to pull it off the shelves, and they're not even allowed to donate it, which isn't true. They're able to donate it if it's close to the sell-by or past the sell-by date, provided that it is still edible and safe for consumption. But so there's weird corporate rules, and it's all about maintaining kind of the standard of quality and maintaining their kind of brand recognition for having high quality products. It's just this weird kind of consumer, because people, when they go into the grocery store, if they are in the bulk produce section, they're going to pick the nicest looking apple. It's just consumer buying behavior. And these kind of business marketing decisions are driven by the consumer at the end point. So, I don't know.
To add to that a little bit, on the farm level, it is CFIA, I do believe, they do the grade A, so you can't. So at the farm level, we throw out, if you're wanting to pack for these retailers, it needs to follow a standard, and that standard is rugged. And, like for carrots, for example, one little kind of curve to the left, and it's out, it's gone, it's deer bait or whatever.
So back to the feeding of the rotten carrots to the pigs. How is that with their animal welfare?
Never seen a study on rotten carrots to pigs, but they eat just about anything and don't seem to get sick from it, so it's not necessarily a welfare problem. I guess it would be specific to what was wrong with the food before you fed it to them, but some things would be safe for them that we might not want to eat.
It wouldn't be their main. So these are pigs that are on pasture, and we would take it out and we would dump it in the pasture. And if they chose to go through it, they could. It wasn't like we're force feeding them rotten carrots. It's just an option.
When I was doing my project, I actually was speaking to a gentleman who used to, back when Scottsburn had both their milk and ice cream, he used to take their waste product, mix the milk and the ice cream, and then take it to Herman Burfalo's hog farm out in Fort Ellis. So that was how they were kind of reusing and recapturing some waste products locally here. So it was just going from Truro to Fort Ellis. But when they were no longer doing the milk as well, and they just went to straight ice cream, it was too sugary, and Herman didn't want it. And instead, it's going to the agricultural anaerobic digester out in Shuby.
I have a question for Josh. So I've seen on your social media and your farm's social media in the past that you guys sometimes invite people to your farm. You'll have bulk product available or invite people to come to harvest product in the field. Can you talk to the reasons for doing that and what uptake you have from the community on it? Oh gosh, maybe I shouldn't have asked.
Yes, we do those things. So we, on our farm, we will have stuff that we have to pull out that's not going to meet the standards of grade A. And if we get a large amount of them, we will just glean them from the bins that we picked them from. So we just set up a market, or there'll just be bins outside of our packing shed that we just take a picture on Facebook and say it's open for whoever to come and get it. But we prefer that you would pick it up for human consumption, not because some people show up in a half ton and throw it all in the back for their pigs. That's not what we want to have happen. And then oftentimes if we have a situation in the field and things aren't going to get picked, or the stores haven't ordered, or people don't want it, we just open up the field for people to just come and glean. And we get people like Found and Forgotten or Soup, or just regular folks that are like, hey, that's a good deal, and they just come and pick a whole bunch of corn and freeze it for the winter. Is that sort of, did you just want me to reiterate what you said, but more detail?
What kind of uptake you have in the community in that, and I guess the reasons why you choose to do that?
Huge uptakes. So, it's every time we do it, it's just it's overwhelming how many people show up in our farm to get this food that is for free. And they don't seem to care that it's a crooked carrot or a broken carrot, or they have to cut the end off of the potato. They're just really happy for food. I have a question. It's for Rebecca. And in your study about animal welfare, there's a fair amount of talk on animal welfare in my circle of Nuffield, and it was more around the social license to produce. Is that something that you encounter?
It's certainly an idea I've encountered. My work is focused more on the animal side, but there are certainly animal welfare people who are doing the social science side of it and trying to understand the social license and what would get people on board with it or keep people on board with animal production. So there is certainly research going on in that, but there's a lot of different ideas about that, so we don't get all of society giving us a license for it, certainly.
More questions?
Facebook has a question. Someone's commented on, oh, I lost it, Lauren. Oh. How do we reconcile the cost of food waste to the farmer? What are the costs to the farmers?
Could you repeat the question?
You can.
Something about cost.
Patricia on Facebook asked, how do we reconcile the cost of food waste to the farmer? And what are the costs to the farmer?
Very good question, Patricia. Maybe you want to start with that?
So most of my research was at the consumer and retail stages, but one of the things that I really came across was that, we don't value our food enough. We have the privilege here in Canada of having an overabundance, so it allows us to overconsume and overpurchase, and we don't place the sort of value that is actually should be held to our food the way that we should. How do we balance that cost and match that cost to the farmer? I don't know. It's a kind of a fundamental issue within our system where our farmers aren't seeing the return and our consumers don't see the value.
That's such a hard question. I think she asked that question because we grapple with it, and she was probably trying to prompt me to say something very intelligent, but she should know better. I don't know how to reconcile it, if that's a word. It's hard. I mean, it's like, when you can only sell the best of the best and the other has to be thrown away. You would have to go to a place, I guess, where, the farmer actually gets paid by the people to produce food. And so then everyone would just come get their share of the food. And that's kind of what CSA is about, is that, people support the farm and they get a share of what you produce instead of the situation that a lot of farmers are in, is that they grow food and they only get compensated for the really good stuff, and the rest of it's garbage. We don't want it. And so maybe that answers your question, Patricia.
I think Deanna, another question.
I'd like to follow up a little bit on this social license to produce. First of all, if you could please, one of you clarify, because I'm not sure we all have the same understanding of what that means. Rebecca, or is that something that you or Josh?
So I guess it's just the idea that our systems of how we produce food, we need to have some sort of social agreement on how those should work. And so we need at least some portion of society to agree with the way we're doing it. So there's talk about consumers versus society as a whole, and some people act differently as consumers than they do as citizens making public decisions about how these things should work. But yes, it's about the general social consensus on how the system should work.
And I guess then to follow up on that, the majority of the food that the people in this world eat come from large companies. even in the developing countries now, we find that there are many large multinationals that are producing a lot of produce, animal products and plant products, and particularly as we grow to a more urbanized environment, that's probably going to continue. What is your feeling, both from an animal welfare side and a food waste side, and from yourself, Josh, on how we reconcile that large multinational development or production of food with this social license, where we now have individuals that are saying, yes, we can still keep animals as long as they're kept in a very natural environment, they're kept in an organic state, and yet we know that the production of food from those smaller units makes up such a small portion of the food needs of the entire world.
Do you want to go first?
I don't know how to reconcile that one. I mean, our policy is transparency. Like, just like, come to the farm, come see how it's done, and then you can make that choice for yourself. And oftentimes people, they're just not engaged in food at all. Like, it's just something that they need to buy, and they hate that they need to buy it, but they need to buy it because they rather have the iPhone XR or whatever that latest one is. Maybe it's 11 with the 3 camera things. Anyway, so that's what they would prefer to have happen with their money. So I as you were speaking, I just, I'm at that food, the Committee of Food Security. There's so much talk about, what's going to feed the masses isn't those big farms. And at the high level, like the highest level in that organization, they're all saying small-scale farmers are going to feed the people. But when I was there, I was representing the private sector mechanism. And of course, in that private sector mechanism is a lot of big farms and corporate farms. And so, it's a real push back and forth. Like, they hear these people saying these words, but it's like they can't see it. What do you mean small farmers are going to do it? That doesn't make sense to me. And so it's a struggle, and I wonder when that's going to start trickling down to the grassroots again. I have no idea. But in my traveling around the world, I mean, we went to Oregon, to Tillamook Valley, where there used to be, like, not but 10 years ago, 250 dairy farmers, and now there's like 80. And I said to the guy, buddy, yeah, I said, so when's it going to stop? Like, where does it stop? And he says, to tell you the truth, I can already tell you where it's going to stop. It's going to stop with 2 people, 2 farms. That valley will be 2 farms, same production, everything but 2 farms. So the disconnect between what these people are saying at FAO and what's happening on the ground is I don't know if I answered your question or just told you some stories to. But yeah, I don't know how to reconcile all that.
Yeah, I don't have a clear answer for you either, really. I don't think there is an easy answer to that. I would say I'm not sure that small-scale farming, certainly with, as he's referring to, the decreasing number of farmers, that's not going to work for them all to have small-scale farms and feed everyone. So either we need to change eating habits and get more people farming, or we need some of the larger farms. But I think, at least on the animal side, it's not necessarily the size of farms that controls whether the animal welfare is okay. So part of it is about actually having good systems for farming at that scale and convincing consumers that it's not necessarily the size, it's the systems that people have in place and whether they have the staff to take care of them and everything. So I think there's a bit of a balance there and maybe some education that needs to happen as well.
I have something to add, but it's not really related to the food waste. It's more tapping into some of my business social science stuff. And it might be a bit, I don't even know if it's a full formulated thought that I'm 100% behind. But generally, when we're looking at industry and industry structures, When we see multiple firms start to consolidate, that's when we know an industry has reached maturity. And it's something that we anticipate and we expect to see. We expect to see small firms bought up by larger firms and consolidated, because that means that there's sustainable growth and demand within that industry. So it's something that we anticipate. But then on the other side of it, we have kind of this romanticized ideal of what we want our farms to look like and where we want our food to come from. And that is a bit in contrast with how typical industries grow and reach maturity. And how we bridge that gap, I don't know. We know that government policy is typically driven by public opinion, and we know that business decisions are typically driven by consumer demand. Public and consumer are the same person, but how they operate, as you stated, how they operate in a public space is not usually how they also make consumer decisions. We can see that when California shifted to having cage-free egg production, but there were caged eggs still in the California grocery stores. So as a result, no one was buying the cage-free eggs because they were more expensive because their cost of production increased 40%. So everyone was buying the out-of-state eggs, even though they were the ones that voted and passed the bill requiring cage-free egg systems. So this is when you start trying to decipher human behavior in general. It's impossible. We're not rational. We are not rational beings. So it's you're always going to be caught between a rock and a hard place.
So this is kind of segueing again from your question, and basically like covering a lot of what you guys were just talking about. But have you guys seen the Netflix documentary Biggest Little Farm? Yeah? Okay. Sorry. I
saw it at Devour.
Sorry?
Devour, the food festival in Wolfville it was there.
Wow. Okay. Well, I don't, sorry, I'm just really excited. I'm actually hoping to come here next year for plant science, and seeing that just got me like really excited and hopeful at the same time. But hearing conversation on like how everything's consolidating and stuff is also like, I don't know where I'm going with this. I'm really fascinated by like the biodynamic farms and how like diversity helps like improve the quality of everything. Economically, I'm not sure where that line is, but is that something that we can also see in the future of like hopefully like small farms, or is that something that's viable in the future? Like lots of small farms implementing that kind of. I'm very new to all of this, so it's just very piqued my curiosity recently.
I just want so consolidating of firms isn't necessarily the only way. Like we can see in dairy farms, actually, small farms and large farms are the ones that are more likely to be profitable. And actually, some small farms are operating at a level of efficiency that you can't actually capture in large farms. So it's not necessarily only large farms or consolidated groups, but operating as co-ops or clusters or consolidating. More management styles rather than, I just don't want to say that only consolidating into large corporations is indicative. There's multiple different facets to it.
Well, I think it's just exciting that you're excited by farming, and so that's exciting. In whatever production method you choose, yes, there is successful, as you saw in the movie, successful biodynamic farmers. And so it's what you believe in, right? So if you believe in organic, you believe in regenerative, you believe in science or whatever, I guess I call it non-organic, or like there's all kinds of ways. And just be a farmer and pick a way that you want to farm, and I think that you will be successful.
Anyone?
So I left my iPhone 6. It's not an X or an 11. And I'm not sure how much time we have left. Can somebody?
8:20 right now.
8:20, so we've got plenty of time.
I have a question for Josh. Can you explain what you mean by regenerative farming, please?
Regenerative farming. For me, the definition is that you are regenerating the soil and not degrading the soil. So there's lots of practices that I practice. We are not a poster child of regenerative agriculture right now. We would like to be, but there's a lot of practices that we have that have been plowing the ground is not regenerative agriculture. It degrades the soil. We know that, but that's how we are feeding ourselves right now. Using fertilizers with high energy is not regenerative activity. It's a way to grow crops. So does that, it's a long-winded definition, but basically you're building the soil up rather than the opposite. And right now we're on a bad train on soil degradation.
So just to follow up on that, because I had a question as well. You mentioned closing the loop and the importance of animals. I think you said the importance of animals in closing that loop. Do you see any role, I guess obviously you do see a role for animals in sustainability in farming, and could that play perhaps in terms of animal welfare and the question of social license and helping educate and convince people that there is a place for animal production on farms?
There's definitely a place for animal production on farms. So for us, having the animals on the farm, constantly tilling the soil for vegetable production is very difficult. It's very degrading. And so if we want to regenerate our soil, we want to make sure that we're growing hay crops, pasture crops, and have a very long rotation on our farm. So maybe it's 7 years, something like that we're hoping. This year will be the first year that we have a pasture that's been in pasture and animals on it, multi-species animals that I will not plow, maybe a little bit of plowing. But it's hard to do everything right all the time. But so there will be an activity that will have to break up the sod and plant vegetables. And we're excited to see how that will, because we're organic and because we don't have the same kind of toolkit, we're hoping that planting vegetables into a very healthy soil, the idea is that you'll get healthy plants that bugs will hopefully not, as you know, maybe you know, I'm thinking, yeah, probably you know about bugs, that the plants won't give out whatever they give out that attract bugs.
Yeah.
Did that answer your question?
It did. Yeah. I mean, the reason I'm asking is because you're no doubt aware of plant-based protein and the push, for better or worse, that we need to consume more plants, and some people dismiss altogether, therefore, the idea of animals and the role that they play in healthy systems. And some are of the opinion that we can just only produce plants and be okay. So I just wanted to hear your thoughts on that.
I feel that animals do play an important role in that, and I think that there's a diet that I really have kind of taken on a little bit in my lifestyle. It's called the flexitarian diet. So it's a good one. But basically, it's a plant-based diet, but you have some flexibility to eat some meat. So
sure.
So I've got a question for Josh. But first, Josh, I would just like to say thank you for everything you do, putting food on our plates, and thanks to you and all the farmers out there for the hard work you put in up before the sun, go to bed after the sun sets. So on behalf of everyone, thank you so much, and thanks to all our farmers. So I'm going to ask a question, and farmers particularly, but agriculture, right now it's in the public eye. There's lots of misunderstanding out there, and lots of things being thrown around, that aren't factual and not based on science. If there was one thing that you could tell the public right now that you want them to understand about farming and agriculture, what would it be?
I think it would probably be that every farmer that I have ever met in any country are doing the best they can. Is that good?
I have another question for you, Josh. I'm an animal scientist, I'm a geneticist, and I'm interested in animal biodiversity. So I'm really curious about what kind of pigs you keep.
We started off with Tamworth, and then we got some Berkshires from New Ross Farm. And that's been the cross, a couple of I think, there was a boar that we borrowed that was white. I think it was landrace probably, just for a year. And now we have Herefords. We got a Hereford boar, so it's a fairly diverse gene pool there, 3, 4. And I wonder sometimes if I should follow the beef people who have F1s, F2s, and all that stuff. I don't do that with the pigs. And they're a challenge, those varieties, because they like to put fat on, and so they can be outside and be warm, and so that's definitely a challenge that we're trying to face right now, because a lot of consumers don't like that, so much fat on a pork.
So as we look at the increase in the number of farms in Nova Scotia, a lot of them were small farms. And many of the individuals that I have met are actually using some of the minor breeds, the heritage breeds. And that presents some challenges. But as we go forward again with our social license, do you think people might be more accepting of the small farms with some of the more unusual breeds? Would they accept that as an animal product? An animal that's out there on the pasture, rooting through the grass, helping to loosen the soil so that you can plant your vegetables without having to dig holes, rather than landrace, Yorkshire cross, Duroc, kept in a large barn.
Some people, and those people are supporting us now at Taproot Farms, but some people don't have, I feel like it's a privilege, and that's, Trish and I struggle with that, is that we produce this food that people choose to do it, and they have the privilege that they can afford to buy this different kind of food. And so some people don't have that option. And so it's not about a social license, it's about just having enough money to buy some food. And oftentimes the farmer raising those pigs in a barn, and he or she is doing the best they can, and that's just the value chain, and people are buying it, and it's not a value chain that I would like to promote, but it works, and people are doing the best they can.
Do we have any more questions from the audience? Oh, we have one back there.
So this is a mixed question, but do you think that current farmers should be subsidized more, or more money should be going into the development of urban farming and like container greenhouses and that kind of stuff in urban settings? So which one do you think needs more investment to produce more food for the globe?
Do you have anything right off the top of your head? What do I think that the government, should the government invest in? Should it be?
Or even just society? Who should what should get more support? Established farmers, or getting more urban based?
That's hard. I don't want to shoot myself in the foot here. But I really think that there needs to be, it's common, it's like, it's so in your face that we need to engage youth in agriculture. Like it just can't, who is going to produce the food? Robots, I guess. I don't know if we don't engage youth. And so I think that like as much money as we can to throw to get young people involved in agriculture needs to be a priority. I think the farms that are established and they will stay established, but they have another 30 years and they're going to be looking for youth. So, and hopefully we can engage enough youth that we can maybe downsize and there'd be more opportunity to split those big farms out that are massive risks for a young person.
I think the urban farming, the vertical farming, and this isn't a bad thing, it's trendy right now, and I think there's a lot of growth opportunity there. So I think, like you said, getting people engaged and active in agriculture, putting a bit of focus towards that urban farming, I think has a lot of potential for the industry. It's a great way to try and reduce some of the environmental impact. If you can get one of those nice systems in place where recycle of nutrients and your CO2 and like all of that stuff that they're working on developing. Whether one needs subsidized more than the other, I don't know if you could really say that. As we're shifting more to an urban population globally, you're going to need to have food being produced in cities so that, if there is a natural disaster, you don't have a bunch of people without any access to food. It's an interesting kind of thought experiment of like, okay, does the money have to go to one or the other? And if you had to have one, where would you put it? Sort of thing. I don't know if there's a right or a wrong to it, but there's definitely an opportunity when we're talking about that urban farming aspect. There's a ton of like YouTube people who are doing that urban farming. There was one that was really interesting. It was on Vancouver Island, and he was renting people's lawns out to do his agricultural production, or turning their back garages into housing microgreens, and having a really interesting business model all about their microgreen production. So there's really interesting and innovative thinkers out there that are trying to match the urban culture. They're wanting to have access to all of the great assets that are in a city while still working within agriculture and producing food for people. So there's lots of interesting stuff.
In your presentation, you mentioned that to reduce the waste, food waste, we have to do some preventive measures in the start. So what is that starting point according to you? That from where we can start those preventive measures?
It really depends on kind of who we're talking about when we're talking about waste generators. So there's like steps that we as individuals, as consumers, can take. I'd mentioned before doing the meal planning and freezing your leftovers, like small little things that you can do in your home. And if you can't eat it, sending it to the compost. But we have access. When it comes to these sorts of things and waste behavior, it's a learned behavior, and it's something that you really have to catch at the starting stage. So I know that a lot of public schools are including waste reduction in their curriculum, encouraging that engagement at a young level where young kids are able to take ownership of what they're eating and what the impacts of that are. And then at a kind of policy level, we know that having an organics waste ban is effective at reducing terminal food waste or landfill disposal. But what can we get that can help change the behavior to prevent that at the start. It's very expensive. Like when you're looking at changing human behavior and putting these initiatives out, it's really expensive and it takes a lot of time because it is kind of this generational thing where you have to teach the upcoming generation the right behavior and try and reinforce it more than the bad behavior that might be being exhibited in their home. It's this tricky sort of situation, and it's hard. It's just about shifting the culture, which is incredibly difficult to do, because, you know, like I said, we're all so different, and it depends on the community and the family units, the education system. All of these have to play a role within that culture shift, and slow and steady, I guess.
We got one question over here.
Yeah, I am. So I'm just going to throw this out. Young man who asked about the subsidies. I work for the government, so maybe we can have a conversation about what subsidies you think farms are getting after, but I'm not going to derail the panel. I have a really specific question for Dr. Meagher. I heard an Ideas show a couple weeks ago talking about weaning dairy animals, early weaning, and I think she was an animal rights lawyer from the West Coast who wanted to ban it. I'm just curious what you think about it from an animal welfare perspective.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's one of the issues that people are becoming aware of in dairy farming that consumers are not happy about. So weaning in dairy calves, it can mean two different things, but usually I think what the lawyer is probably objecting to is separating the calf from the mother very young, so while they're still drinking milk, which is the standard practice. And I've done a lot of investigating the research on that, actually, because there's been a conflict. A lot of the farmers have said it was better for the health of the calf to separate them young if it was going to happen at all. And there's some work suggesting that if you let the animals bond and then separate the calf from its mother, it's more stressful than if you just take it away right away. So dairy farmers have, partly in the interest of the animals, been doing it as soon as possible because they need to separate them at some point and start getting the milk from the cow. I think if you look closely at the literature, we actually don't have a lot of good evidence on the health side of that, and we don't know enough about the long-term welfare implications. I suspect it would be better for the animals to have some time together before they do get separated. So there's a lot of us starting to think about ways that could happen, because it's quite practically challenging on farms to have the calf with the cow and still be getting milk from her. But we are working on it. There are some farms in the world that are trying to come up with systems where the calf is with the cow some of the time or is with a foster mother. So it's an issue that we're trying to deal with, but I think hopefully it will move that way, that we don't completely separate at birth.
Just a point of interest and to plug a fellow Nuffield scholar from Australia. Her name is Sarah Bolton, and she's a vet there in Australia, and that's what her topic was. Oh, I'm going to kill the topic, but I love the one phrase that she used, and it's bobby calves. Bobby calf, I think it was management maybe, something like that. But anyway, she did her project was really great, and she traveled the world looking at farms that were not separating, and the potential and the social license that it creates, and the benefit to the calf. What I saw of what she did was beef. So raising beef and letting the cow gives almost as much milk, but you get this really healthy beef calf that you can have you weaning weights and all that stuff. Anyway, it's an interesting read if you want to look it up.
Okay.
This question came from the online viewing. It's for all panelists. What do you feel is the biggest challenge facing the agriculture industry as a whole today, and Nova Scotia specifically?
I would say misinformation. I do a lot of work looking at like doing social media analysis, and with social media we can have widespread misinformation, touching every part of the globe, and agriculture is not immune to this fact. I've helped mentor a couple of fourth-year students who have done their work looking at kind of perception of agriculture, and undoubtedly we end up collecting some of these horrific, tweets that are getting all this spread that sometimes they're just of one bad apple that have kind of, collected the notoriety and have now kind of stained the rest of the industry, or we have these movements that are focused on very old, outdated practices, but are preaching them as if they're current to try and support narratives that may not be factual. So misinformation seems to be quite a significant issue that I've come across.
Yeah, I don't know if I can pick one, but I think certainly the disconnect between people consuming the products and people producing it is a big problem, because agriculture is changing fast and people are making decisions about what to buy and what the policies should be without actually understanding what the implications of that are. And then I think there's the issue of increasing production, and things are changing before we actually know the best way to go about it. So sometimes we change in ways that turn out to have consequences we didn't anticipate, and sometimes it's causing more problems. So I think both of those things, the ways that the farms need to change and the fact that a lot of people making decisions don't necessarily see what's actually happening, are causing a lot of problems.
I would say probably cheap imports are a big problem for Nova Scotia farmers. We seem to do a pretty good job on the outside of the grocery store, but it's that inside bit that really takes a lot away from what we're doing. I think that I've touched on engaging youth is a problem, is going to be a problem moving forward. Gender equality is a problem. So if you could sort those three things out, I think farms would flourish. They would just have to. So.
Okay. I think that was excellent. I want to thank all three of our speakers again, Rebecca, Ashley, and Josh, for your excellent presentations and your very thoughtful and well-crafted responses. I was impressed. I want to thank all of you for attending. We're not quite done yet. Stay there for 1 second. I have here in my notes, there's a door prize draw. Do we want to do that now? I have no... That's as much information as I have. Door prize draw. We'll do it in a minute? Okay. So, again, I want to thank our speakers. As a token of thanks, I've got some gifts here. Again, thank you very much to everyone for attending. The slogan under Canada's Agricultural Day on the screen there says, "Let's celebrate the food we love," and I think we've definitely done that. So that's all for us tonight, and thank you for your attendance. Thank you.